Well, happy September, everyone. I'm Nat, and I work at an organization called Exceptional Individuals. If you aren't familiar with us, we support people who are neurodivergent, so dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, etc., etc. And we help them get high-end employment. We also work with organizations to make them inclusive, essentially the good A to Z. But today we are going to be focusing on autism. And that's going to include everything from those who resonate with Asperger's to those with ASD, ASC, however you like to resonate or recognize it. Now, as I said, this is our lovely team. What makes us particularly unique is that we are neurodivergent. We do have autism, we do have dyslexia, and we teach people with our life experience as well as our professional and academic experiences. So from recruitment, audit, and here is some of our lovely team. We've got a much bigger team now, so I really do need to update this, but we're a nice little bunch. We're based in London, but we work across the UK, and we even do a bit here and there outside of the UK. And we actually deliver these webinars every single week forever. So if you are new today and you like today, do check us out. The one we did last week was the Competitive Dyslexic Entrepreneur, looking at why are there so many dyslexic entrepreneurs? 40% of self-made millionaires are supposed to be dyslexic. That's a ridiculous amount. And we kind of go through that, we dive in deep, and I appreciate most people attending today probably will have autism, but as we probably know that being neurodivergent is something which is very co-occurring. So if you have one thing, the likelihood of having another is really, really high. So we wouldn't be surprised. And what we got here, nice. Christian said, I won my case and I knew of dyspraxia in 2018 and I got my autism in 2021. Oh, nice stuff. I was inspired by this case in Belfast. I will definitely check that out. So first of all, what is autism? Most people will know, but it's one of those things where everyone has their own definition and diagnosis or way of resonating. Officially, it's autism spectrum disorder, ASD, but more and more people are saying autism spectrum condition because the word disorder has a lot of negative connotations. But from a medical point of view, it is used. I mean, I'd be curious to know how you will resonate with it. Do you use that term or do you use Asperger's, or is there another way that you prefer to be recognized? Do you go with first person language, third person? I'm going to kind of go between all of them today. So personally, I prefer to say, oh, I'm autistic rather than a person with autism or a person living with autism. But that is my personal preference. But if you have a different one, completely fine. Okay, we've got Adrian uses ASC, not ASD. I think as an organization, we are going more towards ASC. I think it depends on the context. If we're talking about a clinical perspective, maybe ASD. If we're talking from a societal, social point of view, ASC. Christian, gifted, nice. Let's see what we got. April says, I just use the term autism. Me too. Unite requires me to say person with autism. I always use autistic worker. Interesting. You know, each organization will have their own agreed terms. It's quite difficult because, say, someone with dyslexia might say, oh, a person with dyslexia, but most people, from my experience with autism, prefer to say autism first. You know, it's one of those things I think is going to continuously change and isn't particularly fluid, but the most important thing is just listening to people and kind of responding accordingly. Yorani says, I used to manage a large team with staff with all different abilities, so I like to learn about how to use terms that best support my staff. Well, the short answer is listen to the team, ask them what works for them, and kind of adapt accordingly. The longer answer is if officially autism spectrum disorder is the official one. So you can, I wouldn't say you can't go wrong with it, but that is the base one, and then adjust it according to the people around you. Got in 2017 is disabled job application won this case. Oh, nice. Do keep those cases coming because they're always interesting to dive in deep. As an organization, we often help people going through tribunals, disagreements, passing probation. So we have really seen some pretty horrendous cases, but also ones that haven't been that stressful. So it's a mixed bag. Now, a quick thing, how many people are thought to have ASC? In the world, are we looking at 1% of the population, 2%, 3%, 5%? And this is a controversial one because where do you get your stats from? I got it from WHO, the World Health Organization. I believe they underplay it. So the correct answer is 1%. Now that is the going average. In the US, it's about 2.5%, they say. In the UK, it varies. Some say it used to be about 1 in 100. Others might say 1 in like 50. It's one of these numbers which is continuously in flux. But what I will say is certain areas, certain populations, certain professions will have a higher percentage. And also stats are continuously changing. If you look at the graph of the amount of people who were diagnosed, it has skyrocketed. Is it a pandemic? No, it's just we're getting better at diagnosing and better at understanding people. So to those who said 3%, it very well may be. The next one is, are certain groups more likely to be autistic, male or female? And this is important to know because when we think of discrimination, we always come up with this idea in our head of what that individual might look like when we say the word autistic. But that doesn't mean that is the only demographic which is able to be autistic and can be discriminated against. So most of you have said males, and yeah, it is. You are more likely to have autism and be male. Now, is that because males are naturally more likely, or is it due to how people are perceived and seen? Is it about masking? Is it about how when the standard of autism was being created, it was created from a male perspective? It is that one. And the way how it manifests and shows itself is very different. So someone with a mild to moderate understanding of autism at very best will understand the qualities that males demonstrate rather than the one that females do. So today, has there been many cases with female and autism who went on to tribunal? Not that many, but that doesn't mean that those people aren't being discriminated against. It doesn't mean that they don't require support, but it's harder because you need some case examples in order to gain momentum that you can refer back to. Christian says, we are more proud to disclose. I think we are getting that way, and different demographics, different religions, different beliefs, faith, all those things. There is like different highs and ups. The sad truth is, if you're white and male, you're more likely to be autistic, not because of genetics, but because of society. And you will see that reflected in some of the research today. Oh, here is a battered prawn. So can you stop being autistic? Yes, no, sometimes. This might seem a bit of an obvious question, but it's more complicated than you would think, because when you look at autism, we normally think of it as a childhood condition, but most of us will know that it is lifelong. It's something you have for your whole life. Then why do we not see autism as much in adults? Many, many reasons. One, we learn to mask. We learn to fake it till we make it, but then we have to continue it. Another one is people who are currently adults today are less likely to have a diagnosis. So we have this kind of skewed reality on those who are autistic and those who are not. You can learn to manage your characteristics. You can learn to adapt certain quirks or eccentricities, like you can change certain elements, but that's not getting rid of it. That's adapting, that's learning, that's growing, that's masking. So no, you cannot stop being autistic, but you can support someone with autism to better navigate the world we live in. So we've got, I say autistic children become autistic adults, but yes, we learn So symptoms might be less as we grow up too. Absolutely. So this little prawn is not stopping, so we'll go next. So here's a couple true or false. And with some of these, there's a right answer, some there's a wrong answer, some it's debatable. But the first one, is autism a disability? Yes or no? Is it disabling? And I know what you'll probably say, nah, it can't be, yes or no, binary, non-binary, 1 or 0. But just for argument's sake, because when it comes to law, things like to be black and white. We've got, is autism covered under the Equality Act? And I appreciate some of you may not be from the UK, but most people have like similar laws, particularly in Western countries. And autism is automatically protected against disability discrimination. So Sarah says the environment we live in makes it disabling. You are very right, Sarah. And I think autism is a tough one because it is a big spectrum. For some people, it is incredibly debilitating and it can impact every element of their life. For other people, it might be in certain situations or when they're stressed or when they're under a lot of pressure. So it can vary, but as a whole, it is a disability, because if it is a disability, you are covered under the Equality Act, and it means you are entitled to support. If you don't consider it a disability, it's harder to get the support that you would really benefit from. But it's not a disability because there's many strengths to it. If society was perfect, if we lived in this utopia, would it necessarily be? Arguably not. It is a bit more complex because, we all resonate at different things. Maybe when we were younger, it was disabling. Now it's empowering. Or maybe we go through stages in our life where we love it, where we hate it, where we wish we'd get rid of it, where we wouldn't have our lives anyway, but. So it does change. Priscilla says, this is why PIP assessments discriminate against neurodivergent people, as it doesn't account for context, masking, or fluctuation. You're absolutely right. Christian says, you can only use your gifts when you're diagnosed. Use your diagnosis to have a better life. Never be blocked in life. Extra ability, absolutely. And we've got Adrian says, the problem is that the medical model requires the triad of impairments for diagnosis, the DCMV, etc. Yeah, we are going to be looking at the diagnostic thingy of mental disorders. I'm reading that at the moment. What a book. It's a bit dry, but really useful. And yes, the triad of impairment we discussed previously, but this is a model which describes, like, if you have those 3 things, you are having autism. But there's been a lot of debate and a lot of fluctuation, is that really what it is? It's always changing, but it's a good start. And yeah, so DSM-5 is compared to 4, 3, 2, 1. And seeing how it's changed over the years is also really interesting. Our understanding of autism has grown rapidly. So it is a very fast-moving industry. I guess it might be in some ways, but you know what I mean. So let's see which ones were right, which ones were wrong. Yes, autism is a disability, and that doesn't mean that it has to be disabling for everything you do in life. But when it comes to a legal perspective, it's a disability, and that is a good thing. But that doesn't mean that we can't work for a more inclusive world. Is it covered under the Equality Act? Yes, it is. Now, autism is automatically protected against disability discrimination. So it isn't outlined in the Equality Act. It's one of those kind of like asterisk things. It has always been accepted, but it's not explicitly accepted. So for if you're looking for like the really easy answer, yes, it does count. It is accepted. It is covered. But if you're looking for the small print, no. And this is why tribunals and cases are really important, because those are the things we use as a benchmark, as something we use to compare. Well, this is how this went in another situation. So I think this should be the answer we're looking at this time, rather than a hard and fast rule. The New Equality Act, if no one knows about it, it's a great piece of legislation that got kind of updated in 2010. And it's basically saying there are some protected characteristics and groups which we must look after and make sure that people do not discriminate you. Now, discrimination could look like not giving you a job, treating you different, giving different opportunities. But they include things like age discrimination, disability discrimination, gender reassignment, race, religion, sex, orientation, pregnancy, civil marriages, all of those. Now, for autism, as well as the other neurodivergences, they would come under disability. But as most of us know, if you have one of these, you might also have another one, and that might increase the likelihood of discrimination. So let's say you're Black, female, and have autism. If you're being discriminated against, how do you know what it is because? And if it's a mix of them, does that make it easier or harder? Well, some of the cases have shown that it can make it harder to kind of pinpoint. The more black and white things are, the easier it is to prove. But we all know that life isn't that simple. So employee discrimination. Have you ever felt discriminated? So this is made to feel bad for being who you are or put at a disadvantage for something you cannot help. Harder definitionally law have not updated enough to include intersectionality issues. You're completely right. So on here, we got, have you been discriminated during recruitment? Oh, very balanced at the moment. Have you been discriminated against when it comes to seeking a promotion? Have you wanted to rise up in the ranks, but maybe someone thought, oh, I don't think you can do this. Maybe it's in training or bullied. Oh, bullied due to dyslexia. My bad. I am dyslexic, by the way, so sometimes I've got that like Freudian slip. So convert that to autism. And what we got here, so Christian says, someone with autism is a king or queen without a castle. We need reasonable adjustments to build our castle as we need help from others to put the stones, bricks in place or to build our castle so we have a safe life in our castle. I like that analogy. It's a nice image. Priscilla says, I definitely have been discriminated in almost all jobs. Really sorry to hear that. Naomi says, at all stages, I have been discriminated against. Eeks. Honestly, when I hear these stories, they do hurt. And it's so difficult, isn't it? Because is it conscious discrimination or unconscious discrimination? I like to think if, more often than not, people don't do it intentionally, it might be due to lack of education, just ignorance, a whole heap of reasons, but sometimes it is intentional. And I think maybe they're both bad, but one I think hits a little harder. So here's a quick definition for you on reasonable adjustments. When you look at tribunals and cases, the word reasonable adjustment comes into play a lot. So have you implemented reasonable adjustments in order to support someone with a protected characteristic under the Equality Act 2010, such as autism? Well, reasonable. Great. We're starting off with an ambiguous term. What does it mean to be reasonable? Well, okay. If you are overstimulated by loud noises, is it reasonable to give someone an office of their own? Well, if there's plenty of offices going spare, yeah. If there's no room for an office, no. If you need to bulldoze a building and make a brand new one, no. Typically, it comes down to, is it going to have a negative or disruptive effects to the organization or other staff included? That's typically what it comes down to. So let's say the organization could not afford the adjustments you need, that might be considered unreasonable. But if it's just, say, having a more frequent one-to-one, if it's something which really isn't going to damage the company, absolutely. And I think this image is always a good way to show what equality is. Equality and stuff isn't about giving everyone the same opportunities. It's about appreciating that we're all different and giving us the adjustments that allow us to have the same opportunities. Kinda. Worded clunkily, but hopefully you get what I mean. So reasonable adjustments in this case is changes to working conditions. It could be equipment, it could be duties, it could be hours. And most people would have received reasonable adjustments when it comes to, like, say you got a bad back, you'd have like a special chair, your wrist hurts, you'll have like a special keyboard. But when it comes to autism, we don't get anything. And we still need support because our brains are working extra fast and they can burn out. So being able to have those adjustments in place early on makes a massive, massive difference. So often these things are not put in place when they are recommended, and that is what leads to settlements and people having to pay and kind of going to court because it wasn't acted in a fast enough time. All right, let's see what we got in the comments. Okay, Sarah says, I think there are stages of intention and therefore stages of actions that can be taken. Yep. Adrian says, yes, but reasonable is a weasel word. Yeah. Michaela says, if I am told I cannot rent a flat privately due to being unemployed, due to being disabled, mental health, is that going against the Equality Act? Yes. If someone says you cannot do it due to a protected characteristic, absolutely. You need to get it in writing or something. Otherwise, it's just you against them. I'm not an expert, but well, I'm not a lawyer, by the way, so this is not legal advice. This is us just having a discussion, you know, FYI. Nice. Christian has sent a document on reasonable adjustments. I'll download that. That looks interesting. We've got, yes, a lot of workarounds with reasonable that employers take advantage of. It's about equality, not, it's about equality, not equal. Sorry, terrible at pronunciation. So many organizations are not equipped to handle reasonable adjustments that are not very obvious. Hello, good to see you, Nat. How would I get it in writing? Good question, and good to see you too. I would, you know, via email, I don't want to be that person who encourages you to monitor and record everything, but you have to get it in writing in an email, ideally, or get multiple other people to be witness to it. Otherwise, you know, these things, going through these horrible processes aren't nice. And I wouldn't recommend them unless you feel it's worthwhile for you and you think there's a good chance. Yarni says, the NHS is supposed to be a caring business. It was so difficult as a manager to be forced to focus on targets and not your staff. I couldn't agree with this and found it so frustrating. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. If there's one thing I've learned since working with organizations last several years, is that there's not really such thing as an inclusive organization. There's inclusive managers and inclusive people within the company. That's a bit of a shame, but it gives me hope that it takes a lot of looking around until you find the place you feel most comfortable in. So here's our first case that I want to discuss. So compensation for disability discrimination. This is a case which I'm not sure if any of you have heard of. It was first reported in 2019. And there was this young woman called Penny, and she worked for the MOD, the Ministry of Defense. She was diagnosed with Asperger's when she was younger, and she applied for this new role within the MOD. So she already worked in the MOD, and she applied for a new role. She had to pass a particular test, a situational judgment test. I don't know if any of you have ever done these tests. They're not great. They say, in this scenario, what would you do? A, B, C, D. And they're looking for a very particular way of thinking. So they're not really looking for neurodiverse variation within their team. She failed this test because her brain doesn't work that way. And despite showing a very strong experience and knowledge of the job, she didn't get it. But everything up to that point would say otherwise, that she was a great candidate for this. The MOD was not prepared to waiver the test. So they said, hi, this test isn't working for me. I need some adjustments. And they said, nope, we're not going to. So Penny raised a grievance. The test made it more difficult for people with ASD, and this was backed up by many, many other professionals. And despite that, they still weren't willing to make these adjustments, despite her fitting the job role perfectly. Adjustments should have been offered. There were many different ways that they could have made it more inclusive. It wasn't that this was not possible. It was more that they weren't willing to make these adjustments. This case was settled, like for money, just a few days before it went to court. And I think that is very, very telling when someone they get scared because the MOD knew they were going to lose. They knew they were in the wrong. And I have seen this time and time again with different government departments, particularly like civil service, the way they kind of measure competence. is a way which doesn't put neurodivergent individuals in the best light. Yoni says, I bet they didn't give it by giving her the job. No, they did not. And I think she didn't actually want the job after that. It's a difficult one. It's tough because what they do, they look at the percentage like, okay, if there were reasonable adjustments in place, what is the percentage wise of how likely they would be to receive the job? And that is normally how they kind of determine how much money to give. But money's nothing. This poor person's self-esteem must have been severely knocked. And what a stressful thing to go through. It's also the same difficulty with asking too open questions in job interviews, absolutely, or not having the questions to begin with. April says, I think I took an SJT when I applied for a role in a phone shop once, but I didn't get the job. Oh, yeah. I mean, I really struggled with it. I've had those similar tests before and I failed them every time. I even write, I'm really good at woodwork. Don't want to brag, I'm good with tools. And I applied for a job at B&Q. I would have been perfect at that job, but I didn't get the job because I failed their judgment test. It's really unfair because they're not looking at individuals, they're looking at numbers. Money doesn't cover the time, energy, distress, and the heartbreak you feel when you are discriminated against. Thanks, Naomi, and I agree with you. People think that we do this just for a quick cash grab. Oh, I wish. No, this is an ordeal to go through. So a quick thing, what do you think an employer's duty to reasonable adjustments should be? Like, how far should they go? Should they go to the ends of the earth? Should they at least acknowledge it? Where's the line? Because the word reasonable is so bloody vague, how would an employer know where their thing starts and where it finishes? Is it up to the individual? Is it up to the manager? Is it up to the regional managers? Or is it up to the CEO? Who really holds the responsibility here? Or is it the shareholders? Because I find most people pass on responsibility, like, not my problem. Is it HR's issue? We've got make the tests more accessible for people with autism and other types of neurodiversity. Absolutely, have it on paper already. What can you do? I hate when they put the emphasis on us. You should have these things in place already. Being sexist is used to be the main on the Clapham omnibus decides what it is reasonable. Discuss with employees what would work. Yes, definitely. I think have an open discussion. For me, I always like the idea of having like a menu of things that have worked for other people in the past, but still has the element of flexibility where you can still add your own spin on it. Oh, I don't know that example in the omnibus. Sorry, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Naomi says, follow the law and not discriminate as a minimum. Everyone is responsible. We all have lives and work together. I agree. As a manager, you can agree adjustments, but then have them declined by senior management or HR, even if you justify the decision. That is true. And with these bigger organizations, it is tough. Like, whoever said that, do not think today is about bashing managers or HR. Absolutely not. We are a team and we're working together. And it's so easy to put the blame on a single individual because you are the person who's having to say no at the end of the day, when actually it's a much, much bigger issue. So it's really not black and white at all. We've got review any adjustments, ask for feedback, and don't assume that the first thing you try will work. Yes, I like that a lot. Often people say, all right, we've done the reasonable adjustment. We don't need to do any more. Job done. It's an ongoing process to find what works for you. So yeah, absolutely spot on that. I think this would be a good time now before I go any further. Like, Christian, sorry, was it you who said you had an example?
Yeah, I won my case at an employment tribunal for a job application in 2018, where I asked for an oral application because it was an online and the company refused.
How was that process for you?
It was 4 years. I haven't had any money yet, but in November I get some money, hopefully. But it might be £1, it might be more. Nobody knows. But the one the inspiration I took was from the BT versus Mir in 2018. He was an autistic guy. He was 23. Yep. He tried to get a job in Belfast, and basically BT blocked him in the application process. He won his tribunal. They went to appeal, and they lost the appeal. So he got 18 grand for a one job application with a 22% chance of success in that graduate role. And he was a specialist in IT.
We are actually going to be talking about that later on. So yeah, good summary.
He's the best case for any autistic person to think differently towards what is reasonable, what is not, and what is the point of having reasonable adjustments and asking for help. If people block you, bring it to the judge every time. Bring it to the judge. Let the judge decide the problem. You're not here in life to make friends. You're here in life to go on a journey. And if anyone blocks your journey, bring it to the judge. And then your children and everyone else who's autistic after you will have a better life.
You're completely right there, Christian. And thank you for sharing that. I totally agree, because when I was talking about the Equality Act earlier on, it's too grey. So that your best bet is by looking at previous case examples and saying this is how the judge favoured it. So I think you're right. And in terms of the key go-to, that case is really influential. And for those of you who aren't aware of it, we are going to be talking about that shortly. So just moving on to the next bit, what if my autism isn't severe enough to be a disability? And I know most of you will be like, what do you mean? This isn't my words. This is things that I've heard before from employers. Or it might be that whole imposter syndrome. Like, because we know autism is such a big spectrum, we always think, well, does mine count? There's other people who have it worse. Should I make a deal about this? Absolutely. It doesn't matter how it affects you. The fact is, things require more effort than others for you. And if you don't have the right support in place, burnout is going to happen sooner or later. It's not a surprise that people with autism are more likely to suffer from depression and anxiety. So do not downplay it. Sometimes I feel a bit of a con artist for saying I have autism because I know other people struggle so more. And I think by acknowledging I have my own needs and I need support, I'm not underplaying other people's views and experiences. We'd be made to kind of feel bad for saying we need help just because there's other people who arguably need help more or in a different way. But I'd love to know your thoughts on that. So employers should offer support if required. This is the go-to. If someone has asked for support, give them support. But also, if someone hasn't asked for support and it is clear that they would benefit from support, you are still obliged to offer some support. When someone doesn't say they need support, that's when it gets a little bit harder, but it is still best practice to give the support anyway. Failure is a breach of trust and confidence. So regardless of the legal ramifications, you are really going to damage the culture in the organization. Constructive dismissal may be claimed. People can make these claims and they do, and they win. No one wants to go through it. It's not good for the individual's well-being and it's not good for the company's reputation. And the employer could be in breach of health and safety. So we talk about the Discrimination Act, the Equality Act a lot, but that's not the only act you can use for reference. It can also be health and safety. There's also other ones in mind as well. So even if for whatever reason you think you might not be successful under one legislation, that doesn't mean that there isn't another one which would also fall into. Because as we know, autism isn't a singular condition. It's something which affects every single aspect of your life. So it naturally goes in all directions. Naomi has just said, constructive dismissal only works if you have been employed for 2 years or more by the same employer. Thanks for that, that's really useful. We've got the problem is that employers have been told about the disability to be required to make reasonable adjustments. There are instances where that's not always true, but probably 8 times out of 10, yes, that is. Sarah says, burnout from underdiagnosed autism and the masking this leads to years actually nearly killed me. That's because of a secondary physical issue that was equally undiagnosed, Crohn's disease. Never mind the major period of depression before and since. Don't mean to sound like a downer. Don't worry, your experience is really valued. Love my life and happy. However, I wanted to make the point that having to mask, which many more women do, is hugely dangerous. And I agree with you. It's important because, like Christian said earlier, that we're doing this for others, so other people have an easier life and existence. Just being content and happy, is what we would all want. So thank you for sharing that. All right, so here is another case example, which I thought was really interesting. So this is when an analyst won a discrimination claim. So an autistic analyst won a claim for indirect disability discrimination. And I'm going to walk you through this case to hopefully bring it to life. It has been simplified. A judge ruled that NPower had a continuous management failure. So this was an example of an analyst who worked at NPower, a power company, and how they failed him and how they sued for discrimination and won. Sherborne, he had an open planned office and he felt very overwhelmed. So this is an autistic individual who worked in an office. So this individual worked at an organization, NPower, and they had an open planned office. And in this organization, it was noisy. There was people, like his back was facing, people was walking behind him all day. And it was just stressful. It was overwhelming. There was different sounds. There was different noises. And within the first week, his manager said, this isn't good enough. You're being lazy. You're being disruptive. You're agitated. And was already making the person feel sad. So the person kind of said, this doesn't work for me. I need help. And the person, I think a quote from the organization was something along the lines of, we're not here to wipe your ass, which refers to the person like being babysitted. And it's because the reasonable adjustments were not made. Now, the person went to an occupational therapist. They had their own personal doctor, and they all said, you've got an anxiety disorder. And if you were to have an autism assessment, it'd be very, very likely that you would have autism. And as a result, they gave a list of recommendations, and the person went back to the office and gave those recommendations. Now, those recommendations were ignored. So the person decided, I can't do this. This is really affecting me. And they ended up having to go off work sick. And they led to thoughts of depression, suicidal natures. It got really dark. So they went, took it to court. And though NPower really argued that no, there wasn't any proof, it was hearsay, because the person had recommendations and those recommendations weren't acted on in the slightest. That's one of the reasons why they were able to win. Now, this could have gone really different. So say someone made reasonable adjustments or acknowledged it, but it was totally disregarded. And the manager, who was part of the issue in this, accepted that all the reasonable adjustments could have been implemented, but were not. And that is what kind of turned this case around. So if someone has put adjustments in place and they're still struggling, the organization might be in their right to say, this isn't the right role for you. But on this occasion, that's not how it turned out. But before the person was fired, they actually said, we think you should take a lower grade job. So they tried to de-promote the person. And when the person said, no, I don't want a low payer job with less responsibilities, that's when they said, there's no place for you in this organization. So it was incredibly poorly planned. And why was it? Was it due to this one bad apple? Or was it due to lack of training or management? Who should have got involved and when should they got involved? It's a really interesting case and quite sad, to be honest. So here's another question to all of you. Tips you would give employers managing autistic employees. So if you right now could speak to a manager and they have an autistic employee who they are currently struggling with or just recently been told is joining the team, what advice do you think could have the biggest impact? And oh God, yes, Adrian, thank you for posting that. Adrian has posted the link to the study I just mentioned. Nice, Lego instructions. Start with kindness and a chat. Thanks, Naomi. I think we've always got to remember we are human beings, and you don't have to be an autistic expert. You just have to be an empathetic human being. We've got take part in neurodiversity training to raise awareness of autism. Yes, this has to be a two-step approach. You've got, if you're the individual who has autism, understand your brain, learn more about it, try and verbalize it to others if you're able to. But more importantly, the organization, you don't have to be an expert, but you at least have to show some willing to learn or know where to direct people or signpost if they are looking for help. And also, one training doesn't make it like tick done. It's an ongoing process. You've got to keep that learning up. We've got to ask the autistic worker what adjustments they need and appoint a mentor. Absolutely. The first port of call should always be to speak with the person. Now, there is a caveat to that where the autistic person might not necessarily know what works best for them. And I think that's when you need to work together to try things out, trial and failure. It might not work, try something a bit different. You can't just say, I put this one adjustment in place and then say my job is done. It's ongoing. We've got, okay, Sarah says training for managers and surrounding teams on autism awareness right from the start. Yes, right from the start. This is beneficial to the people you support. It might be beneficial to family members. It might be beneficial to the people you are serving, like if you have customers. Naomi also says training, but not just for managers. Absolutely, this should be across the board. Sometimes it could be difficult to get senior management or the leadership team to attend the training because they're so busy, when they're the people who we need in those seats, as well as people who are just starting off in the jobs. Or we've also got mentors. I think mentors can be really helpful. I'm also a big fan of setting up networks, society groups, places where the people with autism or neurodivergences can come together and share experiences. As often, they are all very difficult with you. I think a good mentor can really help, but a bad mentor can kind of make it worse. So you do have to have a level of quality checking. So a few top tips from us, at least, is that all people with autism are different. Dialogue is important to ensure needs are being met. Once aware, an employer should assume it is under a legal duty to make a reasonable adjustment. Provide training for other staff about autism, as you all said. An open dialogue with employees is critical. But yeah, really start straight away. If you are an employer, do not wait until difficulties arise. The second you know someone has started and they have acknowledged or mentioned or you suspect there's autism, try and put things in place. A workplace needs assessment, occupational health, just having regular conversations and regular one-to-ones really do go a long way. Naomi says it isn't always easy to talk to your manager. You're completely right there. Not fun to tell a stranger who has power over your job. And that is up to the organization to create a culture where people do feel comfortable and inclusive. So if you do not diagnose it or do not disclose, they should put the emphasis on you. They should be continuously working to create that beautiful culture. So just to finish up with, if any of you are in work and do have autism, but I don't know where you are in your journey, get help now. And not help because you need help, but help because you never know when you might need it, or it can actually strengthen your case. So if you say, well, I never had an assessment. If you say I've had an assessment and they didn't implement it or you didn't get help, it really strengthens your case. Or if you do not have a diagnosis, you might think, am I allowed to get support? Absolutely. With a workplace needs assessment or through Access to Work, which is a government grant, which some of you may be aware of, you don't actually need proof. You just have to resonate with a lot of the characteristics and some of the challenges that are associated with autism. So if you're in the UK, if you have autism, if you're currently working, all you need to do is having a job, get a free assessment. We actually do them, but you can go elsewhere if you want. You can apply for the grant, they send it to the government, they give you the okay, and then your employer has a list of recommendations that they need to implement or work with you to find the best solution. This is a great starting point. And also, it's typically completely free. unless you're in like a really big company who can easily afford it. Most small companies, if you're brand new to the job, it's always free. So they have no reason not to implement it. And this kind of gets rid of the reasonable adjustments because it's definitely reasonable because it's not coming to any negative effects of the company. So do definitely check these out. It's called Access to Work, or you can find it via our website if you're interested. But now finishing up, any last questions from the audience or any statements, if anyone has some like interesting nuggets or information or advice, because I think it's clear to see most people here do have autism and have experienced discrimination. So what can we do to protect, people who are in the workforce now? We've got Christian says you must act within 90 days or less you get ACAS involved. Or less to get, yes, that's interesting and very good to know. Oh, Naomi says, I was recently fired, refused to provide reasonable adjustments. I declared, I demanded assessment support and begged for help. It was ignored and evidence was not acknowledged and then fired for repeatedly complaining because I refused to tolerate abuse and accept discrimination. Honestly, Naomi, I'm so sorry to hear that. It really does break my heart because it's just lack of understanding. I'm so grateful all of you attended today, but where are all the managers? Where are the people who aren't autistic? I know we've got a couple in here, but not nearly enough. So we need to get the right people to want to get educated. We've got pester GPs with emails until they refer you. Yep, it's not easy getting a diagnosis under the NHS, but pestering does work eventually. Autism Plus works in Yorkshire and have EU funding for supporting autistic adults into and work. Nice, we'll check that out. Or EU funding, we use it while we got it. We've got Sarah says as part of policies around disabilities and workplaces, you should have information freely available and easy to find about support that they can give, including access to work grants. Yes. The amount of companies I work with who say, oh no, we've got policies in place, we've got support available. Where is it? If it's not easily accessible and publicly acknowledged, how can you expect people to take advantage of it? It's not enough to say, yeah, we've got, say, some speech software that people can download if they go to IT. They have to know about it. That doesn't count otherwise. Okay, we've got, oh, nice, questions are great. Policies mean nothing if no one follows it completely. I'd be surprised if many people actually ever do read the policies, but I can bet you if you go against it, they'll quote it. So do try and read them if you're able to. We've got different unions like Unite, GBT. They can be really useful if you're able to apply for them. NHS helps sometimes have people to keep you in their role. Tailored job unions can help too, such education programs for reps, e.g. autism employment. Don't be a victim, be a winner. Nice, these are all really great. Not all organizations have access to unions. Not all organizations will have support networks, but if you know there's more than one of you, which let's face it, there will be, if you're able to, I encourage you to create your own network of like-minded people who can act as advocates. Because we are not alone. Sometimes we are made to feel that we are the problem, we are the minority, and we are just a troublemaker. We are not. We're neurodivergent. There's 1 in 7 people in the world is neurodivergent. This is a demographic that we need to take notice of. Anyway, let's end there on today because they're quite a hard subject. But to let you know on what we will be doing for next week we're doing dyslexia in the workplace. And I know a lot of you will also have dyslexia. And we're just going to be looking at how is it in the workplace for those with dyslexia, the pros, the cons, the support available, the adjustments, how people talk to you, how you can get the best out of it. We're going a complete overview. So definitely sign up to that. You can click on the little link or it'll be in the chat on the video. And we have a whole heap of videos. So if you like today and you want to catch up on more, go to our channel. We have the controversial history of Hans Asperger's. We have autism v Asperger's. We have the science of autism. Lots and lots of sessions where we kind of dive in deep It's people with autism, talking to those with autism, keeping that discussion going and help educating everyone. So I really appreciate how interactive you were all today. Thank you so much for sharing your examples, for sharing documents, for giving different case examples. And hopefully I'll get to go through all this information and maybe do a future session about this. If any of you are like, I'm not sure if I have autism, we don't diagnose individuals, but what we can do is have free online tests which give you a rough idea. So you might want to do this test like, do I have autism? And if you come out highly likely, take that information, go to your GP and have a conversation. You may not feel that you need support right now, but you never know what you might need in the future. And it's better to have things in place early on than wait until doomsday. So I hope you enjoyed today. Here's the details if you want to get in contact with us. But thank you so much, as always, everyone. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. Whew, a lot of talking, but good stuff. Thanks, Yanni. Thanks, Christian. Thanks, Naomi. Thanks, Kerry, April, Lauren, Claire, Adrian, Sarah, and Priscilla. Really appreciate you all attending. Bye, everyone. And hopefully see you next week.